Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by italki.com. italki is a language learning platform that allows you to have a hands-on, one-on-one experience with a language speaker from around the world. So if you're looking to learn a language like Mandarin or Japanese or Spanish, you can connect with somebody from Chile or Spain or China, and you can learn from somebody who speaks that language, which is way better than learning from an app or from a computer program. It's also affordable and convenient. If you want to get started with italki today, visit www.theworldwanderers.com/italki, sign up for your first lesson, and get your second lesson free.
This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Praxis. Praxis is a 9-month professional development and life acceleration program. I just added in all of those terms. It's a 9-month program to kickstart your career if you're someone who doesn't want to roll through life the conventional way. You do a 3-month professional development boot camp and then a 6-month apprenticeship at a very cool startup where you learn real world skills and how to create value for cool organizations and how to just be an awesome person. A big part of the Praxis experience is the advisor-participant relationship. If you're a participant in the program, you have an advisor who you talk to every 2 weeks about your goals, about your challenges at work, about things you want to focus on improving, or just about philosophy in general. As a Praxis participant, this was one of my favorite parts of the program, and Amanda and I are both lucky enough now to work as advisors for Praxis participants who are going through the program. Amanda, what's your experience like as a Praxis advisor?
My experience as a Praxis advisor has been super fulfilling. I love getting together with each of my participants. They're all at different companies going through different experiences, and it's always neat to hear the projects that they're working on and the things that excite them in their day-to-day lives. And Praxis really attracts self-starting, high-achieving individuals, so it's really inspiring when I get to hop on Skype or on Zoom or on the phone with somebody who is really looking to lead a self-directed life. So if this sounds like something that you're interested in, learn more about Praxis at discoverpraxis.com. Scroll down to the bottom, click schedule a call, and learn if the opportunity is right for you. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're super excited for today's episode because we're talking about hostels versus Airbnb versus hotels, basically just going through the different ways that we like to stay and talking about the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, and so we basically stay at Airbnbs and hostels with the occasional hotel, guest house,
homestay
thrown in there. But basically hostels are Airbnbs. And it's kind of evolved over time from almost exclusively hostels the first few times we did long backpacking trips to now Airbnbs a lot more often. And both have pros and both have cons. So we just kind of wanted to dig into that. And our experience now, about a month into a trip where we've kind of stayed on our own more, we haven't stayed at a hostel yet, have we? One time. One hostel.
Yeah.
One night. And kind of the things we felt like, this is kind of an enjoyable feature about hostel that we're missing, but then also some of the stuff that we're not missing.
Right. So we'll start with hostels. I think that makes the most sense. So some of the pros that I think are huge about hostels is like the social environment, the social atmosphere, the ability to meet other people, other travelers from all over the world. I think that that's probably one of the biggest pros about hostels, in my opinion.
Yeah, you have the affordability, I think, is kind of what draws people into hostels. Being able to stay in a dorm room as a solo traveler is amazing because then you can afford to go all sorts of places that you couldn't afford hotels for. But what I found like the most enjoyable part of it and the part that adds the most value is just meeting people. Like staying in a dorm room is a great opportunity to meet people. And I think it's well worth the trade-off of like the occasional disturbance.
Right. And I think like we've talked about hostel experiences quite a bit on the show. We haven't had that many bad hostel experiences. I think we had one bad snorer together. Ryan had one really bad snorer when he was alone on his solo trip in Central Europe last year. I had one maybe close encounter with a couple having sex, but they were actually too drunk to do anything. Like nothing major has really happened. So overall, hostels are a pretty enjoyable experience, especially because you do get to meet so many people.
Yeah, overwhelmingly positive experiences.
Yeah, I think another big benefit is the fact that it is so affordable. And, it's something that we'll talk about kind of with Airbnb as well, because we do come as a twosome. So it's not that difference in price. But when I look at the individual price, if you look at a bed for one person being $17 and a really affordable Airbnb being, 30, maybe 40, that's a massive difference. It's 2 nights for the price of one. So if you're traveling on your own, it makes a lot of sense to stay in a dorm room in a bunk bed, just for the simple fact of how much it costs.
Yeah, I think that if you're a solo traveler, it's worth keeping an eye on Airbnb because occasionally there's cool, like a twin bedroom, or twin bedroom that you can find on there. There's occasionally good stuff, so I think it's worth keeping an eye on as a solo backpacker. But if you're a couple or traveling with a friend, that's when like Airbnb really gets into like a competitive neighborhood.
Right. Yeah. And I think that I always check. So my sort of like strategy when I look up accommodation is I always check Hostel World because it gives you a really good idea for sort of like the cool neighborhoods. Hostels are usually located in sort of like the cool areas of town. And then I'll look at prices and sort of what hostels have in terms of dorm rooms, private rooms. I think for us, especially since we're working abroad this time around, there's a lot of times where it makes sense for us to have our own space. We do a lot of calls and that sort of stuff is just like not really appropriate in a dorm room. You can't get up at 7 a.m. and turn on Skype and start talking loudly in an 8-bed dorm. Like it's just not good dorm room etiquette.
Probably could, but it might not be good for your sleep the next night.
Or like, yeah, you could. It's in the realm of possibility. I just feel like for me as a human being, that would not be very integral, or it's just like not. I really value sleep and being quiet in dorm rooms, so I don't think that I could personally actually do that to other people. But what I was getting at is that I always pull up the options for hostels and then I'll compare them with Airbnb and just see what makes the most sense for us. So I'm consistently, even though we stay in Airbnbs a lot more now, I'm always looking at the options for hostels just because I think that, if we can find a private room in a hostel that's going to give us sort of like the best of both worlds in terms of like privacy to be able to do what we need to do for work, but also giving us that social atmosphere. I mean, that's amazing. It's just usually not, it just usually doesn't work out, as well in that regard.
And one of the things that hostels are really great for is kind of like getting a lay of the land in a city you're going to. So if you are staying at an Airbnb or even a hotel, if you check into your room and you're with your girlfriend or whatever, friend, whoever it may be.
Mom, dad, brother, sister.
Yeah.
Travel partner of sorts.
You're just like, you don't have the opportunity to hear as much from people who have been in that city for a while. Whereas you check into a dorm room, you're like, oh, hey, have you been here for a while? They're like, yeah, what'd you do today? You immediately start getting some information about the options for things to do in that city. You start getting some reviews, and you get all this like great word of mouth information from the people you're staying with. And then in the hostel as well, the relationship between like hostel employees and like hostel guests is a much more like peer relationship for the most part.
Right.
So it seems like people are a lot more eager to tell you like stuff to do. Hotel, you kind of have to like seek it out and go to the concierge and like they're like, oh yeah, you should do this, blah blah blah. But at a hostel, you do get a lot more information. So I think that there's like a really big value for staying at a hostel, like when you get into a city. And this is something we were kind of talking about because we're doing slower travel now, staying places for a couple weeks, up to a month. We're like, maybe we should try to do like, come into a city, book like 2 nights at a hostel, stay there just to like meet people, get some word of mouth stuff, and then like move off onto our own with like a list of things we want to do.
Right. Yeah. It's something we were talking about just because it's the thing that I've been missing the most so far on this trip, and something that kind of inspired this episode was when we were talking about how Airbnb, some Airbnbs will give you like some advice on places to go. Like we found that in North America, like when we were traveling through the US using Airbnb. But it seems like since being here, we haven't really had any Airbnbs that have given us like any advice on things to go, things to do, or things to see. And so you arrive and you've got this like sweet space, but you're like a complete stranger to the city. And it takes a lot of like research to figure out what to do. And we really love like the word of mouth. Like, oh yeah, somebody recommended this to me. I did it. It was kind of like this. I probably wouldn't do it, or I would do it. Like just finding out firsthand what somebody else thought about it is really, really key. And definitely the thing that I'm missing the most about being mostly in Airbnbs.
And so, like, how do you feel like you solve that problem while staying at an Airbnb?
I think that being like diligent about being on the internet and looking at the things to do. So for Kuala Lumpur, it was kind of looking on Wiki Travel, looking up like, you know, best things to do in Kuala Lumpur. The other thing is reaching out to your social network. Like we posted on Facebook and just said like, hey, we're in KL. Does anybody have any recommendations? And I mean, the post was like full of different comments and questions. So if anyone's listening, thank you so much for the recommendations. It's super helpful. Reaching out to your network is like massively, massively helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else that you would add to that?
No, I think that covers it from like finding out stuff to do, like making sure you're reaching out to your network. Yeah, something though that I think I've been missing about staying on our own is just that social dynamic. And it's kind of weird because like when we're making a decision, a lot of the times I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely more comfortable staying on my own. But then like afterwards, I feel like I don't feel like as satisfied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Like it's like there's all these like side effects that you get traveling, and like they're not the most obvious when you're doing it, but so I feel like you're going to a city and you're like, oh, I can choose between staying in a hostel or staying at an Airbnb. This Airbnb is in a nice location, have space to myself. I can still go out and see all the sights of this destination I'm going to. But a lot of the fun part about traveling is completely unrelated to the destination you're in. And it's like going out for a fun night with people that you've met, making new friends who probably aren't from that place. And that's all stuff that happens at hostels, like where you meet some cool friends from Europe or from like Australia, and then probably from Australia.
Yeah,
and you guys
most likely
have some good conversation, and you kind of get the chance to network with cool people. But you kind of underestimate that when you're comparing. You kind of compare on price and like the standard features, but it's hard to put a value on the social aspect of it.
right. And the thing that's like great about the applications that you can use to book hostels. So my application of choice is Hostel World. I'll also like reference it with hostel bookers from time to time just to see like if it's different. I'll usually only do that if there's nothing coming up that's really like catching my eye. So for example, booking somewhere that's like pretty much booked out, if you're like late booking, maybe just going on hostel bookers and seeing if they have anything that's different available, because I think that a lot of hostels will give like so many rooms to the app, and sometimes there's like not as many that have been booked out through hostel bookers or vice versa. So just like referencing back and forth. But the things that I look for that are huge are like security, location, value for money, and then like the social atmosphere. And for us, it's not really about like if there's a bump in bar or if there's like a pub crawl. It's more about just like what is the atmosphere like? Like, is there a cool common area where people are talking and where there's a book exchange where you can like swap your books, and then quiet dorms? Like that's kind of what we look for.
Or like friendly staff.
Yeah. Like we're not really looking for, I think maybe a couple of years ago it was different what we were looking for, but we're not really looking for the type of place where it's like, oh yeah, we brought the party back to the dorm room. It was so fun. We stayed up all night, like went out to clubs every night, to like slept in during the day. That's not really our scene. I probably wouldn't book a hostel that had reviews about that sort of thing or promoted that sort of thing. But I mean, you might be a different traveler than us. So taking in consideration what you're looking for and what's important to you when you're going to book a hostel.
Yeah, and so when just like a tiny tangent into like what to look for if you're using Hostel World, or looking for a hostel in a new city, the ratings are really good. Like you can usually we usually use it like this. Like we'll kind of filter out, 8 and below,
Yeah.
and then from those better ones, based on location and just purely look at the reviews. Like don't, oh, this is a 9.2, this is an 8.5, because like Amanda was saying, there are different reasons people think things are good. So some hostels people rate poorly because it's quiet, and some hostels people rate poorly because there's people partying. So it's like an either or thing. But if you just pull up the review page, it's one of the best reputation systems around. Like as far as the detail people leave in the reviews, I don't know what that is, but it seems like it's better than like any other. Not just hostel thing, but like it's way better than TripAdvisor, way better than Airbnb, it seems, as well.
Yeah, I think it might just be sort of like the travel culture, like the idea that travelers really learn from one another. Like the entire reason why we're talking about how great hostels are is like this word of mouth. And so it's like you go as a traveler and you stay at a hostel and you want to share your entire experience. So maybe it was like an 8.5 for you and it wasn't like the best hostel ever, but it was also like really great. You can talk about like, the beds were really comfortable. I was really happy because there was a storage locker, but like the lock on the door didn't work, which is like kind of a concern for me. Somebody can look at that and be like, well, I'm not really traveling with anything valuable. Like, I don't really care about that. Or I have my own bag lock. Like, I'm not worried. And maybe, that's just a non-concern for them. Like, I think that people are really good about just giving really accurate pictures of what their stay was like. And I think that it's to help other travelers. It's to pass on that information of like, here's what I loved, here's what I didn't love, here's like how I experienced this hostel. Like, do what you will with this.
Yeah.
It's not like out to be like, this is the best hostel. Like, and I mean, some people are probably like this, like, stay here, it's amazing, or like, don't stay here, it's terrible. Like, there is that as well. But for the most part, it seems like people are just writing about their experience, which is really cool. I wish TripAdvisor was like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Or like ratings for restaurants were like that.
So jumping into Airbnb, like what are the things we use to make decisions about that?
Right. So looking at an Airbnb in a city, the things that I look for, once again, location, price, reviews as well.
And so you kind of mentioned looking at the location of hostels and kind of basing Airbnbs off of that.
Right. So if I show up in a new city, so say like showing up in Singapore, it's, I don't know anything about Singapore. I literally know nothing other than it has, well, I know stuff now because they've been, but before that, I know nothing other than the Marina Bay Sands Hotel looks really cool and I want to see that. So it's like pulling up Hostel World gives like a really good accurate picture of sort of the popular areas to stay, because you'll kind of see that hostels will be kind of like condensed in certain areas. And I think that's always helpful for me when I pull up Airbnb, because so one of the cons of Airbnb is that anyone can rent their home. So it can be somebody in like a suburb. It can be somebody like right downtown in an apartment.
I don't know if that's a con.
Like con-ish. I mean, depending on what you're looking for. If we don't have a car, I mean, it's totally dependent on the situation, because we stayed at a suburb at a place in Memphis and it was fine. We had a car, we had easy access to Uber. We were only there for a night. So it depends what you're looking for. A week in Singapore, no car. Uber is relatively affordable, but it's way cheaper if we can walk most places. So looking at like what's going to be like closest to the things we want to do, and hostels are usually a good way to figure out where the happenings are happening.
The happenings. Yeah, and then on Airbnb, I think reading like thoroughly through reviews, it seems like one of the advantages I think to reviews on a hostel site is that there's just way more people staying there, so you get like live reviews. Sometimes on Airbnb the reviews are quite old. And if a few people don't leave reviews, and there hasn't been a review for like 2 months, like looking like critically at the pictures, because like the pictures are only going to show like nice stuff, and like, you know, look for like the grit in the corner, and then kind of dig into the reviews and see if people are saying stuff, because I feel like you do have to be a little bit more skeptical on there.
Yeah, and like looking at, so on Airbnb, there's like a way to see the description of the place, and I always like to do like a thorough read through on that, because, you know, having Wi-Fi at an Airbnb is not a given. And I guess it's not a given at a hostel, but it's like basically a given in 2016 that there's going to be like free Wi-Fi at a hostel. It's like pretty rare now that you experience a hostel without free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that would
If
be
we're
strange.
wrong on that, somebody send us an email and let us know.
I think they would just get like harassed with negative reviews.
Right. Like, I just don't think it would survive in, you know, the way that technology is now. But free Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi in general at an Airbnb, especially maybe in a developing country, is really not a given. So looking through and seeing, you know, okay, just because it's in a house, am I allowed to use their kitchen? We've stayed at lots of Airbnbs where the kitchen is off bounds. You know, am I going to be sharing a bathroom with other guests? Just like getting a really good picture for what you're doing. Like hostels and hotels, I feel like there's kind of a standard. Like dorm rooms can be like kind of different, but it's like fairly easy to picture in your mind what it's going to look like. It might be smaller, bigger, beds might be slightly different, but for the most part, it's like standard. Airbnbs come in like all shapes and sizes, packages, like there's all sorts of stuff on there. Stuff as much as like, oh, there's a bedroom in the living room that I'm charging for. Get clear on that. Like, understand what you're paying for, because, you know, a picture can show just a bed and you're like, oh, great, that's a room. And then you go and you read further and you're like, oh, this is actually like a bed that's been set up in this person's living room and they live there. Is that something that I really want to pay for?
Yeah.
If you do, that's cool. If you're me, you don't want to pay for that. So understand what you're paying for. Also looking at the cancellation policy. I think Hostel World has like pretty standard cancellation rules, whereas Airbnb has a policy where the host actually gets to choose if they're like flexible, moderate, or strict. And just looking at that and understanding it. Because if you get into like a strict cancellation policy, you're kind of a little bit screwed if you're not happy, like having a good time. Whereas like, I think Hostel World is a little bit more, or hostels in general are a little bit more flexible with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it's easier to cancel. And it's kind of something that we kind of started to hit on it in like our technology episode from a little while ago. But one thing that we didn't touch on in that episode was that technology allows you to be so much more flexible. And this is something that's kind of changed with us, whereas in the past, you might have thought about going to a city and booking your stay for that entire time you're going to be there before you even get there. Whereas now it's like more and more possible to just book for a few nights. And if you're like, I don't know if this place is actually great, I don't know about the location, like let's just book it for a few nights, and if we want to stay longer, we can try to extend.
Right. So some of the clear like pros for me about staying at an Airbnb is having more space, having some privacy, especially like you can choose between entire apartments, or you can choose just stay like just in a room in somebody's place. So just having that like that option to choose how much space you have is a massive pro for me. And then being able to be in a situation where it is a bit more comfortable, because I find that living out of a backpack at times can be uncomfortable. Being like moving around constantly can be uncomfortable, and finding some comfort within the discomfort that is travel can be a really nice like normalizing thing. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that we used to kind of do, like with the switch between staying in dorm rooms versus like booking ourselves a private room, or like booking ourselves a hostel or something like that, or a hotel, sorry.
Yeah.
Where you get like a break to be by yourself. And so Airbnb, like, it's good because it's so broad in the things that are available to you there. Like, you can find a room in someone's house, you can find people doing like makeshift dorm rooms, or you can find entire apartments or entire houses if you've got that kind of budget. Um, so yeah, the way we've been kind of using it is to like find places for ourselves, um, like to find like space where we've got entire apartment to ourselves. In North America, what was really great about it was there's a lot of cities that don't have hostels, and it's a really good way to find a budget option, just a room in someone's house. Over here, it seems like there's a lot of hostels, so we were kind of using it to find that like mid-range between like something that's way nicer and way more affordable than a hotel.
Right.
And then we kind of touched on this already a bit earlier, but I think that's something that's a bit tricky is like when you're comparing like, do I want to pay $40 a night to stay at this Airbnb, or do I want to pay $20 a night to stay at this hostel? I mean, if you're just by yourself, that's an obvious decision. If there's two of you and it's 40 for the Airbnb and like 35 for the two of you to stay at a hostel, I think that looking at it, it's quite easy to pick the Airbnb because like you're like, oh, I'll have space to myself. That'll be nice. But yeah, you don't really. Sometimes staying in an Airbnb can be quite kind of like isolating. Like if you book one that's in a location that's maybe not central, because Airbnbs can just be in an apartment building anywhere. And if you don't even see the owner, they just give you a code to get in the building. The building's like not many travelers. Like people don't talk to you in an apartment building.
Right. They think you just live there. Or go
yeah. So it can be quite isolating, and you don't really account for that off the top. So I think like something that we've thought a lot about is trying to make sure that we're valuing the social experience that you get and like making a conscious decision about that beforehand.
Right. And I actually think I'm the happiest when I find a balance between time in hostels and time in Airbnbs. I think that you're totally right about like, you know, when you think about like, oh, am I going to enjoy these 3 days more if I know I'm going to get a good sleep because we're on our own, and I know that I'm going to, you know, get lots of work done because we've got the space and stuff, or like, am I going to meet lots of cool people and have like a fun experience in the city? And it's just like, you know, thinking about that trade-off a little bit and finding the balance between the two.
Yeah. And so I guess we should maybe address like the concerns that some people have about Airbnb.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things that's like, if you use it, it's like so obvious to you. But then like you had an experience where you went to Mardi Gras this past year and a friend was like, had never used Airbnb before and was kind of like a little bit nervous about doing it.
Yeah. And we actually didn't end up using it because, I don't know, she was just like uncomfortable, and we found like a cute B&B, and it really worked out for us. Like what we had did work out for us. I was completely happy with where we stayed, but I was like really pushing for Airbnb because we could find some stuff for like a pretty reasonable price and good locations. And I was like, it'll be great to just like have our own space. So, I mean, again, like B&Bs are really nice, which is where we stayed. It was basically like we had our own little like, I guess it was just like a hotel room with like a cool, it was basically like a hotel, but like a more friendly version, which is essentially what B&Bs are.
Yeah. But so we're kind of meant like, if you've never used Airbnb before, like what are you worried about? Like,
right. Okay, let me think from the perspective of somebody who's not me, because I find the concerns really confusing for the most part because I don't have concerns about Airbnb. I think, so my parents were talking, so they are using VRBO, which my friend also uses. And I was like, you should try Airbnb. Like Airbnb is way better than VRBO. And they're like, oh, we saw this like news story about how somebody got really screwed over. So basically what happened, long story short, is that this person was trying to book something. They clicked on some sort of link that popped up, and then they ended up booking through a link that wasn't Airbnb and getting their money scammed. And Airbnb wouldn't help them out because they actually left the Airbnb site. So anything that happens through Airbnb, they've got your back. So for example, somebody canceled on us in Singapore. Airbnb always keeps your deposit. I emailed them. I was like, this isn't my fault. I'd really like my deposit back. They said, yep, no worries. Here's your deposit. It was back in my bank account within a day. They had my back on that one. Know that Airbnb has your back. Like it's a very trustworthy site. You can contact them pretty easily if anything goes wrong. you will always have contact with your host. So you're always given like a way to contact your host, even if they're not there once the booking goes through. So you're always going to be in contact with them and have a way to contact them. So you can get a hold of them pretty easily if something's going wrong and that sort of thing. It's secure. It's so secure to the point where if you try to give them like your email address or your Skype info or your phone number, anything personal about yourself before you've actually done the booking, it encrypts the message so you can't see it.
Yeah. But so anyways, if you've never used Airbnb before,
Was I rambling?
maybe a little bit. Like it's a little bit scary because like there's no like central authority. Well, there's Airbnb, but they're kind of like a loose. It's just like the way it's going to work is you can put up a place on there, and if that place is fairly shitty but it's cheap, you can stay on there as long as people are getting value from it and continue to book it. So you have a bit more responsibility as a user to kind of take a keen eye to things and be like, oh, okay, this place doesn't look good. I don't want to stay there, because you've got this full range of options, whereas hotels were kind of constrained in like, you know, the worst hotel isn't that bad. Most places.
Yeah.
There's like a few options, right? But like the barrier to entry for a hotel is like fairly high. So it's going to be servicing a mid-budget is kind of there. And then you've got like kind of like drug hotels, essentially. But Airbnb's like there's a whole spectrum. Like you can get a $10 one, you can get a $10,000 one.
Right.
So you got to be kind of aware of what you want. And then because you're interacting with a different person, when you're booking, like it's just, you've got to, you know, you've got to communicate with the person who's hosting you, but that's all pretty good. People seem to be fairly well trained about sending you a message, and you just need to make sure beforehand that you've got all the information you need. Like, do I have the correct address? Is there anything weird about the directions? How am I meeting this person? How am I getting the key? Just like you have to think about.
Do I have a door code? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All of that stuff, and making sure that it's really clear. I think again, just like knowing what you're getting into so that there's no surprises when you show up.
Yeah, but it is an amazing service, and if you're a big traveler and you haven't used it yet, like definitely check it out, because especially when you're out of like North America or Europe, there are some amazing deals on really cool places that you can stay.
Well, even like we went to a wedding in the Okanagan in British Columbia this summer, and you know there was like a hotel deal through the wedding, and I looked it up, and for a queen room it was 230 Canadian dollars, and I go on Airbnb and I find an Airbnb that's located closer to the wedding venue than the wedding hotel is. Sure, there's no shuttle, but it's like way closer, and it was $30. That's a savings of $200. That's $100 each, and for one night stay. And it's not even like we're spending time in the room. We literally need somewhere to come back to, crash for 8 hours before we get up and leave again. And we stayed with this like adorable woman. She made us breakfast in the morning. We had some pleasant conversation. Like the entire experience was great. She even offered to come pick us up from the wedding, which was adorable of her. And I mean, not all hosts will be like that. There's an array of different hosts. So I'd say reading reviews is really key. Make sure you read reviews and see sort of like what your host is like. Maybe send them a message, introduce yourself, say like why you're going to be there, get a feel for like their communication style.
Yeah, and if you have concerns beforehand, you can message people before.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we've pretty like thoroughly covered Airbnb. We do really love Airbnb. I've said this a couple times. We're not sponsored by Airbnb. We just like really genuinely love the service. It's a fabulous service. So if you haven't used it before, definitely check it out. And so moving into the last thing that we occasionally use is hotels. And we definitely don't stay in as many hotels as we do Airbnbs or hostels. It's pretty occasional that we use a hotel. For what reasons would we stay in a hotel over a hostel or Airbnb?
So when we went to a travel blogging conference, we chose to stay in a hotel because it is a better opportunity to stay close to the venue and then to maybe meet and connect with the people who are also going to be at the conference because they're also staying at the hotels.
Right. And one of the other reasons is that the conference actually offered like complimentary shuttle service from the partner
Yeah.
hotels, and they give you discounts on the hotels too. So there's a lot of benefits that come with that.
Yeah, and then in that case, like we were in Manila, so Manila's kind of a weird town, and
City.
the area that the conference was happening in was kind of only like a hotel-y area. Like there wasn't much like city there. So to stay in like the cool part of town would have meant dealing with a massive amount of traffic. But yeah, the hotels are kind of like our third option, and we very rarely stay. Like we'll stay in like a guest house or like a kind of like a budget hotel if it's a small town that doesn't really have many options. But our kind of like general look through is like we check Airbnb and Hostel World, and then if there's nothing really on there, we might like move over to like Agoda or like Expedia,
Like booking.com.
yeah, where it's something that shows the hotels as well, and then choose to book at like some sort of budget hotel. But yeah, I think that
Didn't we use
hostels and Airbnbs
Priceline
like
for Vegas?
yeah.
Somewhere where location, like somewhere like Vegas is a really great example of staying at a hotel. I've never stayed at anything other than a hotel in Vegas. And if you're going to hang out on the Strip, I mean, realistically, Airbnbs are going to be like at least a couple blocks off the Strip. And there are some good Airbnbs, but they're really not that much cheaper, or the ones that I saw at least were not that much cheaper than staying at a hotel. So for the convenience factor of just being able to walk out of your hotel and be on the Strip, it was like, why don't we just like have this experience?
Yeah, and I think that while we're over here in Asia, we're probably going to choose to do that a couple times. Like, we kind of looked at the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore and we're like, oh, it'd be really fun to stay there.
Right.
Just for the experience. Or like if we want to go like to a resort, because we feel like doing that might not happen, but we might choose to stay at a hotel there. But for the most part, like if you're just looking at like a city to city thing, if you're looking for a space of your own, Airbnb seems to clobber hotels in terms of the options that are available to you and at the price. Like if a hotel room costs $200 and you look in if you look in Bangkok at a $100 hotel or a $100 Airbnb, it's going to be a pretty crazy difference.
Right. You're going to get so much more for your money with Airbnb. And something that I was thinking about, like I was just trying to rack my brain for when else we've stayed in hotels. And I was thinking about how there's been a couple of our US road trips a couple of years ago where we stayed at hotels. And it's kind of interesting with the US and Canada because there's not hostels in every city. Like even Atlanta didn't have a hostel. I was like, how does this massive city of 6 million people not have a hostel? And it makes things like couch surfing so much more popular because hotels are really expensive. Airbnbs might not be that accessible because a lot of people live like outside of the city center. And so then people turn to something like couch surfing, which is a free service. And it made me think about like, why do we stay at hotels over Airbnbs in like 2012 and 2013? And
we just like didn't know about it or like think about it.
Right. It was like, oh, look at hostels. Okay, there's no like hostels in these cities. And there might be.
And I guess it is weird.
There might be now.
But before you get into like the mindset of like, oh, I'm just going to stay in someone's room or like rent someone's apartment from them, like it is a little bit weird before you've done it or like thought about it.
Right.
I feel like we've done it for long enough that it's normalized, but I think that it is a little bit weird to see like, oh, David Smith is renting out his room and I'm going to like go sleep at his bed.
Right. Yeah. It is kind of weird, but I don't know why it's like more weird than staying in a hotel room that like cycles so many different people through on the same bed. Like people just like think about it differently in their head. They're like, oh, that's like somebody's house. Like somebody slept in that bed. The thing that's really amazing about Airbnb is that like most hosts that we've stayed with take a lot of pride in their space. So lots of hosts will even create like almost like a personalized hotel feel where you get like little shampoos or soap. I stayed at one where I got like a personal package of coffee to make my own coffee in the morning. They offered me beer, like they had snacks waiting for me when I arrived. And I think I talked about this in one of the episodes, maybe my episode about traveling to Atlanta. But when I drove from Canada to Atlanta by myself, I stayed only in Airbnbs. And a lot of that was because there weren't really hostels in the cities that I was staying in. I was staying in obscure places like Eastern Montana and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But I had some really incredible Airbnb experiences where the hosts were like really welcoming to me. And it made me feel so like safe and comfortable to be sleeping in somebody's house instead of like a dank hotel that was expensive where like nobody really like cares about what I'm doing or my well-being or anything like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what are sort of like the pros about staying in a hotel?
I don't know. Usually there's a pool.
Maybe like some of the amenities that you might not get in like a hostel or
Yeah,
Airbnb.
it's kind of like fun. I feel like the nicer versions of hotels are still like kind of enjoyable.
like
you know,
getting
when
like
there's,
bathrobes and
yeah, there's like
having
a
a
bathrobe
spa.
or something fancy or like a cool view. Yeah. I feel like it's tough because the things I love about hostels is like the social community feel of getting to know people. And the thing that's great for us about Airbnbs is like having more space and being able to kind of like make ourselves at home while we're traveling. And hotels kind of like don't really do either of those. Like you've got a little bit more space, you've got space to yourself, but you don't really get to, like you have to still go out to eat all the time. And you don't have like the advantages of like feeling like you're at home, but then you also don't get to socialize with people because people generally don't talk to each other.
Right.
And it's generally quite a bit more expensive. There's often some sort of like city accommodation tax.
They're usually pretty safe though. I will say that.
Yeah, I guess safety is probably,
Like I think
yeah,
that
if
was
you're in,
part of
like,
the reason why. Like if you're feeling uncertain by a city, like we were feeling kind of like uncertain about Manila, if you're uncertain about location, like hotels can be like a pretty safe bet.
yeah, and that's actually a good point. Like in Manila, for example, the hotel we were staying at had security guards up front, which kind of made you more comfortable.
And they had
And,
like a safe in the room.
yeah, and like the
valuables.
very first time we went to Thailand, it was our very first time traveling out of like North America or Europe, and we booked a hotel there and did kind of provide a feeling of like,
Like again, safety.
yeah, safety, or like you kind of felt like a bit more comfort than we probably would have going in and trying to find like a apartment that we rented somewhere.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the biggest pro. I think the con is like the cost it's usually a little bit more expensive, which we've touched on a little bit, and then it's not really social either. So I think that having hotels in the discussion is important, especially for listeners who are preferential to hotels. I think though hostels and Airbnb are definitely our top choices for accommodation when we travel.
Yeah, and so to kind of just like wrap it up, we are like, we kind of moved up to a point in our travels where early on we were just like all hostels all the time. Part of that was due to Airbnb not existing. Part of it was just our age and our price range. And now we're kind of moving up to an area where we can afford to do something nicer and have a bit more space, but we're like really missing the social aspect of hostels. So we're going to try to like do that a bit more often.
Yeah.
So I think like if you're someone who travels almost exclusively in like I think people use the word flash packer, but I don't actually hear anyone other than like marketers using that. But like if you're staying at hotels and Airbnbs, like try to mix it up. Go to a hostel. Like, although it is a little bit uncomfortable staying in a dorm room at first, like it is a really fun experience if you get into the right hostel that's got a good social atmosphere and that has really nice staff. If you can find the right situation, like that can add a lot of value to your trip. Hostels aren't purely about saving money by sleeping in a room with a bunch of other people. Like there's there's other value there. So if you are kind of on that end of the spectrum, mixing it up and going to hostel is cool. And if you are like someone who's kind of been in like a hostel hotel room without experimenting with Airbnb, like definitely check out Airbnb when you're going to a new city. Like there's some cool options on there, and it's a good way to get like a break from a hostel if you've only been staying in hostels, but in a way that's much more affordable than hotels.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that Roy Madigan, who's been on the podcast 4 times, our most frequented guest, and one of our really good friends who we've met traveling, he's got a really great sort of timeline story of how he's transitioned from being more of a hotel traveler to being like more of a backpacker staying in hostels. So if you're kind of like at the stage where you're new to travel or you're feeling uncertain, look up the episodes with Rory and listen to a couple of them and just see how like he kind of progressed with that, because I think that his story is really cool. And he's a good example of going from kind of like fearing hostel dorm rooms a little bit to like living in them constantly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that for me, one of the biggest, biggest like values or things that have changed for me is just becoming like a lot more social and comfortable in social situations. And that happened from staying in hostel dorm rooms.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like probably the best way to learn social skills, I feel like, is to spend like a couple months stayed in dorm rooms.
Yeah. Yes, you were not wrong about that.
All right. So anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. If anyone else or if anyone out there has any questions, comments, or feedback, definitely shoot us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com and check out the show notes on the website.
Until next time.
Ciao.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.